All right. So this evening we're going to start off not in Proverbs. The chapter in the book didn't start in Proverbs, and I figured, well, we should probably start where the book starts because it kind of introduces the way this kind of discussion will go. So in Matthew 12, starting in kind of the middle of verse 33, it reads, "The tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good when you are evil? For out of your abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. For by the words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." How would you evaluate the way you speak? This isn't a rhetorical question. And since there's so few of you, I will start staring very uncomfortably at you if I think you need to talk. So I'm not going to start that unless you make me. So how would you evaluate the way you speak?
Could you rephrase the question?
Okay. So we're talking about, tonight we're talking about speech and how wisdom is seen through the words you say. So how would you evaluate on maybe a scale of, yeah, I say things I shouldn't say, to I say everything exactly correct all the time, I make no mistakes ever. Where would you evaluate how you speak?
Probably somewhere in the middle.
Okay, how so?
I don't know. I think that I'm a generally respectful person, but I know that if I get cut off in traffic, sometimes I'll mutter something under my breath, So, like that.
Sure.
I would change the question a little bit and say, how would you evaluate the way you should speak?
Sure.
And I would go back again to the 9 fruit of the Spirit and just go through those with love, with joy, with peace, with patience, with kindness, with goodness, with faithfulness, with gentleness, and with self-control.
Sure.
We should.
Now, do you speak that way all the time?
Oh, I don't know that I do, but I am striving to speak that way.
Sure. And that's kind of the goal I think we should all have, right? We should all be striving for a better, more wise, more spirit-filled way of speaking. However, that's not always the case. And the loop brings out a lot of bad speech, I think, out of most people.
Just another scripture. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable unto thee, O Lord my God.
Sure. So, I guess we kind of know where we're already heading. We're heading to all these passages about speaking well. The chapter in the book that I've kind of been basing class off of focused a lot on, at least in this first part, on Proverbs chapter 25, because Proverbs 25 has a few kind of, obviously it has Proverbs, but it has some Proverbs centered on speaking. The first one in verse 11 is, "A word fitly spoken is like an apple, or is like apples of gold in a setting of silver." And knowing, when you sit and you try and imagine this, it seems kind of, elegant and lavish, but at the same time you're sitting there and thinking, why would you have just gold apples sitting around? That seems kind of frivolous in your wealth, but I think that kind of shows what the wealth of word fitly spoken is.
It shows the great worth
Sure.
of the words We value gold. In fact, right now, gold is at a record high, and silver is as well.
Sure.
And our words need to be of great value.
Sure. And that's the point that is being made here. The very next verse or proverb reads, like a gold ring or an ornament of gold is like a wise reprover to a listening ear. So not only is it when we say wise statements, those have value, but it's also being able to correct and to truly shape and teach. That type of wisdom is beneficial. I would say we could break it out into our groups, but there's all 8 of us, so we can just talk amongst ourselves. Can you think of a time from your life where you can relate to these proverbs? And if not, that's okay. We can all just stare at each other. That's fine. But maybe it's a time where, looking back, there was that nugget of wisdom someone told you or taught you that is now worth more than anything. Or maybe you're the one who got to say the wise statement. What are some examples maybe from your own life that kind of connect to these proverbs?
They spelled relate wrong. Didn't they?
School teacher, sorry.
Yeah, no, I was typing too fast. I was reading, typing, and then not looking at what I was actually
That's
typing.
okay.
But I could fix it right now. But
I'm in a position where I gather information and then I share it with the judge that's making decisions. And I talk to the parties involved, and it always bothers me when I specifically state the consequences of an action and they ignore it.
yeah,
I think there's another proverb that would tell us that if we receive correction from someone who is wise and gentle, that correction will be taken and appreciated. Where if we are unkind and abrupt and dogmatic, it will not be taken.
sure. And that's kind of what some of those first chapters of Proverbs are really focusing on with the father and the son, right? It's I want you to be wise, and so I'm going to put all this together. I'm writing all these Proverbs, and here's probably the most important ones. I'm putting them up before you first because it's a long book, and you're probably going to start tuning me out once I start getting down into the later chapters. But here are the most important ones. I want you to be wise. But at the same time, he's making comments knowing it has nothing to do with what he says. It's about how his son receives the words. And part of this is the reminder of the receiving is just as valuable as giving wisdom. What are some other thoughts?
I'm a nurse practitioner, so I can see both sides. First of all, I had to listen to my teachers to learn all the knowledge, and I have to listen to my patients to figure out how I can help them, and then I try to speak words of wisdom to give them guidance and advice.
Sure.
I'm sorry, did she say words of wisdom? Because that's ironic.
This is my husband.
All right, we'll just keep going. We continue in Proverbs 25 in verse 13. It reads, like the cold of the snow in the time of harvest is a faithful messenger who sent to those who sent him. He refreshes the souls of his masters. And then Proverbs 25:14. Like clouds and wind without rain is a man who boasts in a gift he does not give. How do verses 13 and 14 relate to verses 11 and 12? Do they relate? Are you going to make me answer?
I'm sorry, I'm the guy who just walked in. What chapter are we in?
Proverbs 25.
Thank you.
I think verses 12 and 13 basically relate to each other. It's harder to add. Well, I guess 11 and 12 are saying the same thing, and 13 is really different.
Sure.
But 14 is almost review.
Mm.
Where a snow-cooled drink at harvest time when you're working and sweating, and it's is a trustworthy messenger to the one who sends him. He refreshes the spirit of his master. That's like an earring of gold or an ornament of fine gold. The rebuke of a wise judge to a listening ear, but has to be to a listening ear.
Yeah.
But shame on anyone who boasts of gifts that were never given.
Sure.
Verses 13 and 14 are basically saying, what value are your words if you're not giving them to others? So it's not enough to be wise if you're not sharing it.
Sure. And I think that's kind of the point, or not kind of the point, that is the point that I wanted us to kind of come to. Of there is value in receiving and saying phrases, and there is value in just saying these things, but there is a part that also comes with receiving and making sure they're hearing the words, but the true value comes in actually using wisdom, to actually sharing the message, to deliver wisdom, because what good is a messenger being sent out if he doesn't actually deliver the message? What good is it to speak and listen and give judgment if no one's going to listen and to receive? And so that's kind of where we're at. Any other comments or thoughts or?
Well, I mean, wisdom is all about talking to where somebody understands what you're saying. You know, if you look at 11 and 12, those are things, you know, gold, it applies very differently to someone who is wealthy or even moderate, as opposed to 13 and 14, which relates to the farmer or the one who works with nature and clouds. You know, if I sit here and give some great wisdom to my 16-year-old daughter who doesn't get it, then I wasn't giving wisdom. You have to understand
Sure.
who you're teaching.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep on chugging along. Continue on. Proverbs 25:15 reads, "With patience a ruler may be persuaded, and a soft tongue will break a bone," which kind of is connected to Proverbs 15:1, which is, "A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." What are some examples of a soft tongue being used in a conversation? It's kind of a weird image, or at least we think of it as muscle, and it can contract and it can be firm and soft, but I don't think that's necessarily the point Solomon's making. What are some examples of a soft tongue, a gentle word being used in a conversation in a way that it does act as it's either something that can break a bone and so impactful, or what are some examples we can think of that happened? Joey, it looked like you were wanting to say
I
something.
was just gonna say that, the sound has a direct effect on the person, to whom you're speaking.
Mm.
And if it is in a kind, soft manner, that is totally opposite from coming through with a loud, and a boisterous, response. Might scare someone in the hallway.
Yeah.
I think about when I was younger and I would do something I wasn't supposed to, and when my parents would discipline us, instead of yelling or screaming or saying harsh things, most of the time it was, we're kind of upset because we know that you know better. And that you know better hurt probably worse than anything else they could have done,
Sure.
In my world, obviously, I'm a little bit on the side of mouthy and loud, My kids have usually become much more serious when dad starts being a little bit quieter and, because it went from just all being noise to, something's not right, I need to listen.
Mm.
And I think the way the person who is being spoken to, if you love the person who is speaking, you don't want to hurt them.
Sure.
And so you listen with your heart and try to respond in like manner.
Yeah. So, one of the things that's been coming out in some of your comments is this way of, there's a wise way, there's a gentleness, there's a tenderness of having speech. What are some ways that, let's switch to kind of more application, what are some ways that we can cultivate a more measured speech, a more wise way of speaking, maybe?
A lot of times it comes from sticking your foot in your mouth and then learning how to do it better next time.
That's the old term that wisdom only comes from screwing up.
Sure. And there's truth in that, and not to throw myself under the bus again, but I will. I brought this up, I can't even remember how many weeks ago, the whole issue of, it's not wise of me to go about every semester that I'm in a Greek class thinking, I don't need to study at all until the midterm, and then once I've failed, that's when I learn, hey, maybe I should have been studying this whole time, because it's pretty hard to pull up a grade that you taint your grade from the first thing that was put in. And it's just one of those, it's the same idea is, well, how are you going to learn to be better at speaking? Well, you have to say some wrong things first. I do think there's some legitimate truth in that. But
Practice makes perfect.
yes.
Another way is listening to how your parents or those who are wiser than you speak and learning better ways
Sure.
to control your tongue.
I'm kind of an impulsive person, so I've had to learn that I don't have to answer immediately, especially if I'm going to answer in anger or in frustration. So I have to take more time and listen more so that I can have more collective responses.
Mm.
I thought of a hymn.
Sure.
I couldn't sing a little bit of it, no, I won't do that, but Lord, speak to me, that I may speak in living echoes of thy tone.
Mm. That's a good line.
Have you all sung that? Lord, speak to me that I may speak in living, in living echoes of thy tone.
be.
Probably not, but I go back a few decades before you.
Oh, sure. Well, Ashley can attest, just because I don't know it doesn't actually mean I don't actually know the song. It just requires me to actually look at the music and the words. Because I'll say, oh, I don't know that many songs. And then once I actually start putting my brain to it and thinking about all the songs I know quite a few songs. Yeah. The next section kind of leads into kind of the same thing that Brady talked about a few weeks ago in his class in James, is that idea of girding your tongue. And so Proverbs has several of these little snippets. In Proverbs 10:19 it reads, "When words are many, transgression is not lacking, but whoever restrains his lips is prudent." Continuing on in Proverbs 13:3, "Whoever guards his mouth preserves his life. He who opens wide his lips comes to ruin." Proverbs 17:28 reads, "Even a fool who keeps silent is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is deemed intelligent." Proverbs 10:10 through 11 reads, "Whoever winks the eye causes trouble, and a babbling fool will come to ruin. The mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, but the mouth of the wicked conceals violence." Again in Proverbs 10 and verse 31, "The mouth of the righteous brings forth wisdom, but the perverse tongue will be cut off." In Proverbs 16:23, "The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips." Do you have a harder time holding back from speaking or speaking up when it is necessary?
Holding back from speaking.
I get that. What's that look for, Ashley?
I said me too. What are you looking at me for?
All right.
Someone else.
Because I already spoke.
Yeah. I can't hear you. You got to speak up.
Me too.
We should do both,
Sure.
absolutely.
Sure. And I think we're more familiar with some of the passage in James. It's not you should just stop talking. It's you need to be controlled in your speech. You need to not fly off the rails, but you also do still need to talk when it's necessary. I fall into both. I struggle to speak up a lot, but then other times you're sitting there and thinking, why is Bergan still talking? He needs to stop talking. He's not making his case. And so it's one of those, sometimes I'm very quick to talk, which is to my detriment. And other times I'm very slow to talk, which is to my detriment. And I have yet to find that middle ground. And I think a lot of us kind of fall into that middle area. But what are some of your thoughts on any of those verses? I know I kind of flew through them, but
Maybe this is being too specific, but the scripture does tell us, and I think about this at times, that we are to be prepared to give an answer
sure.
for the hope that's within us. And,
Yeah.
so when we are asked by those who are not striving to follow God's word, we need to be ready in a gentle way, in a kind way, to explain why we believe what we believe.
Sure.
And I agree with whoever spoke up and said about that holding back from speaking. I have a harder time there
Sure.
probably than
Jackie?
One of the verses that you had, what flashed through my mind is the expression, "just kidding, just kidding."
Mm.
Bullies frequently say
Use that.
very cruel, unkind things, and then they laugh and say, "Just kidding, just kidding." No, that's a habit that as children pick it up, needs to be got
Sure.
rid of. Just kidding is not the truth.
And that's kind of where I struggle with still, is the saying things as a joke and then realizing like 2 minutes, maybe 3 seconds later, oh, that wasn't actually something I should have said at all, but I said it, trying to be funny, and someone kind of laughed, and so it's okay, but it's not okay. I said some things I shouldn't have, because I was just kidding. But
And that's something we cannot retrieve,
sure,
what we have said.
yes.
So we need to, I don't know, what would the expression be, chew over our words carefully before they come out of the mouth.
And that's kind of where what all these verses kind of tie to is, you do need to be more controlled of your speech. It's one thing to know the right things to say. It's another thing to actually be able to control and say when it needs to be said, and not just talk endlessly, because that's not very wise either. Jumping into the New Testament, that's kind of what Jesus kind of describes the Pharisees of doing, of they just get up and start rattling things off. Well, where's the wisdom? Where's the goodness of just getting up and rattling off these sermons? No, you actually have to be wise enough to be poignant with your words and actually speak to people where they're at. Which kind of leads us into the points that the book I was working through was talking about. What the Proverbs teach us kind of in these passages is the quantity of words do not equate to wisdom. You can say a bunch of things or a lot of words and say absolutely nothing at all. I'm running into this a lot in my education of, hey, I need you to write a 12-page paper about this like one single sentence that like you could answer this in a sentence, but I need 12 pages. Well, the 12 pages just becomes me talking a lot and saying nothing. I'm talking in circles, I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again to fill the page requirement, when it could have just been a few sentences explaining my thoughts. It's one of those, in practical sense, getting a lecture is not always the way people want to learn. It's those short, pithy, quick to the point sentences that I can remember a sentence. I'm not going to remember a lecture that went on for 3 hours. I'm not going to, at some point, I'm just going to stop listening. I'll sit there and nod along and say, yes, 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 I'm listening. But if I can be short and to the point, that there's wisdom in that. Another thing is deceit and concealing the truth does not align with wisdom. And that kind of goes to that, oh, I'm just joking. I wasn't lying necessarily, but I was concealing the truth. I was deceiving. I was trying to twist things into being funny or to serve my purposes. Well, that's not what wisdom calls you to do. That's not how wisdom calls you to speak. It is supposed to be clear and intelligent, and there is supposed to be wisdom. It's not supposed to be it's not supposed to just be saying things that are kind of true. No, you're called to speak truth and to speak to the certain message you've been given. And then, kind of as we started from Matthew, wise speech flows out of wise living. You are known by your fruit. The good man speaks good. The evil man can't speak good because he doesn't know good. He doesn't do the good things. So how can he speak too good and all of that when his heart and mouth are so twisted towards evil? And so we'll stop here. Any thoughts so far? I only bring it up because I have a handful of slides left and we have 20 minutes. But
it kind of reminds me of in the New Testament where it talks about your tongue being a rudder that sets your course.
sure.
And that can set your whole course on fire. And, so we have to really be careful about what we say and how we say it so that we don't cause harm. That's just kind of what it reminded me of.
Sure.
Another word on number 1.
Okay.
The quantity of word does not equal wisdom. When the disciples asked the Lord to teach them to pray, the prayer was very direct and it was relatively short. The Pharisees were known for the phylacteries and all they had on their robes, and many of them wanted to be heard for their many words. So their prayers would be long. And now this is not good probably, but I can remember being very young, thinking about brother so-and-so, he's gonna lead prayer. And I shouldn't tell you all this, but I would time him.
Oh.
Because it might be 7 or 8 or 9 minutes. And I think, will it ever end?
Sure.
And I was just a child, and I don't have the right to judge anyone's words to God, but I'm so thankful that the Spirit helps us with our prayers.
Sure.
And we don't have to have go on and on and on.
Sure. Well, I will say that's not just your generation. The young people still do that, and if you go long, even here at Greenlawn, and at least long to their standards, they'll let you know, which is probably not great. But that goes again to that idea of, well, Proverbs and wisdom is meant, yes, for adults to be taught it, but so it's that they can then turn around and teach the younger generation. There's a requirement of, okay, maybe you didn't hear this growing up, and yeah, there's some things you need to change in your life, but there's also that you need to be telling the young people now so that they're not behind the 8 ball, and so that they can avoid this problem of getting tied up in how long a prayer is. That's not what you're supposed to be doing in prayers or worship. You're not supposed to be timing it, but sometimes we sit there and time things, and well, communion took this many more minutes, and so we need to shave that off next week, and so we need to make sure that's not what that's time's meant to be. And so, but at the same time, there's also the stories from the Gospels of, well, you're not supposed to be the Pharisee that gets up and talks forever and boasts, and he wants to be heard, so he stands on the corner. And even in Luke, there's the parable of the sinful tax collector and the Pharisee that goes up to the temple to pray. And the Pharisee is upset that no one's listening to his prayer. No one is paying attention. And he just keeps going. And then
the one says, Lord, be merciful to me.
Exactly.
a sinner.
And Jesus doesn't come out and say it, but he leaves it with the question of, which one of those 2 men left the temple fulfilled? Who was doing better? It's the one who was short and to the point and recognized his own sinfulness, and wasn't the one who, it's a pride issue, so it may not be as completely connected, but it is still that the droning on doesn't help with a lot. But
You have your slide on Matthew 12, 33 through 37 again. Okay. For every careless you'll give on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. The NIV says, but I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. And that's an empty word that kind of bothers me.
sure.
I mean, A careless word, yeah, if you reprimand someone and then you realize, oh, well, they weren't doing anything wrong. That's easy to recognize, but an empty word is something else.
An empty word might be, one that is, a word that you'd have to search to find it. It's so long and
Sure.
it's so, one might be trying to make themselves sound like they are so educated and so
Sure.
knowledgeable.
An expression we interchange a lot. Joe will make a comment and I'll say, bless your heart. And he'll say, oh, my heart's blessed.
No, I'll say thank you.
Are those empty words? Yeah. Anyway, that's,
I don't know.
Well, there are instances where the content may be the same, but it is kind of empty in the way you're saying it. I worked at a grocery store as a cashier, and so I would always say, hey, how are you doing today? Did you find everything all right? Do you have your rewards card? All right, have a good day. Well, after how many times in a day saying that, am I actually legitimately saying, have a good day? How many times am I actually concerned with whether they have their rewards card or not? Or if they are okay when they came through the line? That it comes to a point where some of those words mean nothing anymore. It's just because I'm saying it and it's a written, or not written down, but it's just been this like rut that I've fallen into all day of, well, is the person I said have a good day to at 5 right before I was able to leave in a different situation than the one at 8 when I got there, and then it can get difficult, and then you get the empty and careless words of, well, the 12-page paper I had to write that I could have answered in a sentence. Are a lot of those words empty, and then or careless that I will have to answer for? I don't know. They certainly weren't empty in the fact that they filled 12 pages, but it was empty in the fact of I'm just saying words to say them. And so it gets really interesting when you start breaking down
I do think
phrases
that
like this.
out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And
Sure.
that's why when someone says, just kidding, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. You know, you weren't
Whether
just
it's
kidding.
good or whether it's bad,
Sure.
it's out of the heart.
Well, yeah, and then it's, even if they are just making jokes, well, then out of the abundance of an unserious, foolish, centered life, you're speaking all these things, and well, that's not good either. It's not good to take nothing seriously and just make jokes all day. There are instances of that. I'll just go ahead and finish up kind of some of the last points I had. All right, picking up, because we'll talk about a little bit into the gossiping side of things. Proverbs 16 verses 27 through 28 reads, "A worthless man plots evil, and his speech is like a scorching fire. A dishonest man spreads strife, and a whisperer separates close friends." Proverbs 18:8 reads, "The word of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body," which is then repeated again in Proverbs 26, verses 20 through 22. "For a lack of wood, the fire goes out. And where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. As charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is quarrelsome man for kindling strife. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body." Kind of the last bit of discussion. Why is gossiping so tempting?
Because silence is uncomfortable. So sometimes we feel the need to fill it with nonsense, and it's very human to make ourselves feel better by pointing out flaws in somebody else.
Mm.
You can see that in leadership all over the place.
Sure.
Some people may do it because they wanna make a friend or want them to be their friend and not the other person's friend, you know, there's a lot of drama to gossiping.
Sure.
And we're told if we know of sin in someone's life, a brother, we're to go to him or her in gentleness and win back that brother for whom Christ died.
Sure.
And if we're gossiping, we're spreading. It's like poison.
Mm.
It can be. Instead of being taking some knowledge that, yeah, we might be tempted to spread this with other friends. Do you know what so-and-so did or is doing? Instead of trying to win back a brother.
Sure.
It's like when certain food was forbidden and all, and yet God has said that we can give thanks and virtually eat anything. But if it would cause a weak brother to stumble and fall, then we should eat it. You know, like when they were talking about meat that had been sacrificed to idols and all of that.
Yeah.
You know, that before.
One thing that kind of popped into my head as at least of an image was I ripped a hole in my pants. It wasn't very big. It was around one of the belt loops. I was just pulling up my pants one day and it just kind of snagged and ripped. But once I knew it was there, I couldn't help but mess with it. And every time I would reach down, I would just conveniently have my finger through the little hole in the tear, and it just slowly tore itself and got bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's kind of that same idea with talking, right? We find this one issue and it bugs us so much that, oh, I have to tell so-and-so. I have to tell someone, because they'll think, they'll have something to say. They need to know this. They need to hear what's going on. And so you mess with it and it gets a little bigger, and then that's all you talk about, and then it not only unravels, but it's almost to the point of you're picking a hole in someone else's pants. You're tearing at someone else's little snag in their clothes and garment, and you're doing the damage, but at the same time you're damaging yourself. And so I don't know if the pant hole was the best analogy, but that's kind of where my brain went for a little bit. So all right, into the application. We may get out a few minutes early. How can we guard our mouths from gossiping? What are some practical application ways that we can do that?
Well, I'm gonna treat things that people say to me in confidence, like patient confidentiality. I mean, I know they don't want anyone else to know it, and so I try to keep it to myself. I may tell him, but he's never listening, so.
Confidentiality.
Sonny, you were saying something?
I said, just kick your brain into gear before you open your mouth.
Think on it. Be quick to think and slow to speak, maybe. What else? What are some other ways? If you don't talk, that means we get to the homework quicker, and that means then there's not a whole lot, so it's not like you can hide. I'll know who's here, so I'll be starting off next week with the homework questions. All right, homework time. Usually, or the past couple weeks, it's just been reading, and that's good. But I don't know exactly what all I'm going to cover next week in my conclusion, and so it's hard to tell you what to read ahead for. But I want to give us this challenge. Not memorize a chapter of Proverbs. Memorize one line out of the whole 31 chapters worth of Proverbs that are in the Bible. Pick one and try and memorize it, and just see what happens. And we'll talk about it next week. But just pick. For in most of them, it's a verse, and so pick one verse out of Proverbs and memorize it, and we'll talk about it next week. So that's all I have. We got about 6 minutes before the bell will ring and interrupt everyone else's classes. But thank you guys for being here. That's all I have for this evening. So thanks.